Hello and welcome to That Jewish News Show. I'm Laura E. Adkins, the Forward's opinion editor.
And I'm Benjamin Cohen, our news director.
If you're joining us live on Facebook or YouTube, feel free to drop a comment and say hi and where you're listening from in the comments. You might also see at some point a large fly zoom by my screen because that is something happening in my apartment right now. So, super exciting stuff. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review That Jewish News Show. We have a special guest this week, don't we, Benjamin?
Yeah, up ahead, we'll be joined by Elad Nehorai. He's a columnist for a few publications, including here at the Forward. And we wanted to talk to him about his latest essay, which asks the question on everybody's mind. Is Elon Musk America's most dangerous anti-Semite? We all know Elon Musk.
Nice light question. Yeah,
Light
easy,
question.
light, fair, as always on That Jewish News Show. But we are really excited to have Elad come talk to us. He's been studying the issue for a long time, and will be a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, looking forward to that. So, Laura, what have you been up to since we last recorded?
So much. First of all, I have to apologize to all of our listeners who heard me last week say that the toxic air was totally behind us. I was so wrong. Later that afternoon, New York City skies got oranger than I've ever seen them not at sunset. And I was taking a train to DC and just watched like all of the Eastern corridor in shades of bright orange toxicity. But thankfully, I was in DC for much of the week and only had one day of the super bad air. I was there for an Institute for Nonprofit News conference and got to connect with a lot of friends and colleagues who work in journalism and also, it being DC, in the foreign policy space. And also on Sunday, this was a more exciting part. Two very dear friends of mine got engaged in Fairfax, Virginia. I believe they're both listeners of That Jewish News Show. So Mazel Tov, Danielle and Aryeh. It was very exciting to get to be there for part one of their simcha, but and
Mazel
to be
tov.
in the suburbs. So it was nice. But
Yeah. Following the
Benjamin,
yeah, I don't.
how's farm life?
Yeah, I don't travel as much as you do. I think we've kind of made that clear. The most exciting thing that happened here at our house is we have a room. Laura, if you ever come visit, our guest room is a pug themed guest room because we have
I love
pugs,
that. Yeah.
and so it's just full of pug art. And my wife found at a antique store a upholstered pug chair that she ran out and got, and and so now we have a pug chair in that room. That was the most exciting
A
thing.
pug chair, meaning it looks like a pug,
No, it's a human chair. Good,
or it's
excellent
like
question. Yeah, very journalism of you.
it's
Uh,
sized for a pug?
no, it's a normal
Like,
human-sized
what's pug
chair.
about it?
It's a normal human-sized hair that has a pug on the seat. Is a picture of a pug.
Okay,
Yeah. So,
nice.
but anyway,
Okay,
but
that sounds
first,
very cute.
as riveting as my pug decorations are, let's talk about some news of the week before we have our guests come on. One of the most bizarre stories of the week was some videos showing more than a dozen protesters. This happened this weekend. Neo-Nazis were targeting Disney World, and the video showed more than a dozen protesters waving flags with swastikas at the entrance to Walt Disney World. And it's not the first time, believe it or not, this has happened. The protests seem to be linked to Disney's anti-racism training and initiatives to promote inclusivity. And some Florida Republicans are calling on Governor Ron DeSantis, who has also clashed with Disney over these issues, to condemn the protesters, but he has not yet. Laura, should neo-Nazis be protesting Disney World?
What a leading question. I mean, I anytime there's things involving Florida, it's bound to be chaotic. A fun game to play is to Google your birth date and Florida man and find like a fun news clip of someone doing something ridiculous in Florida. I mean, look, Ron DeSantis is angling for the GOP position. One would think that condemning neo-Nazis would probably endear him to like most American voters who don't fall in
Right.
that demographic, including other GOP folks. So I'm not quite sure why he's playing it this way. But I also think it's like not quite ironic, but an interesting coincidence that Disney is being targeted and is now kind of a representative in some Republican minds of the liberal milieu because Disney was a raging anti Semite and racist. And his great niece, Abigail Disney, has been an outspoken critic and has even called him someone whose behavior bordered on rabid fascism and said he wasn't shy about delving into the stereotypes of the time if it served him. He even went as far as a month after Kristallnacht to personally welcome a Nazi director to Disney's studios. So this is probably not as exciting a full circle, whether you're pro or anti-Nazi. I don't think like 12 folks marching outside of the parks is like terribly exciting, or even something to get worked up about. It certainly wasn't the same degree that, for example, the Charlottesville really frightening riots were. It doesn't seem like there was violence. It's kind of silly, but I don't know. It is a funny coincidence that like Disney, who himself perpetuated a lot of the things that perhaps neo-Nazis would also approve of view-wise, his parks are now being targeted.
I mean, what's surprising to me, we all get that, anti-racism and promoting inclusivity are generally viewed as a good thing. And so it's not right. Inclusivity, a good thing. So it's not surprising that neo-Nazis, are against that. But what boggles my mind is that a politician like Ron DeSantis apparently is against it too. Like in this particular case, it would seem he's on the same side as the neo-Nazis. He's also been clashing with Disney over them being too inclusive. So it just kind of, the whole story just kind of boggles my mind. There's a lot of strange bedfellows here, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it's one thing to have a nuanced opinion on, for example, curriculum in public schools or the age at which transgender children should receive gender affirming health care, but it just shows you how reductionist and stupid a lot of our politics have gotten when a politician can't even condemn neo-Nazis, something that seems very simple because they perhaps are afraid it might embolden their opponent's agenda. It's just it's silliness.
Yeah. So what story have you been following this week?
Well, it's very interesting. Talking about another very old institution having a major shift. George Soros, not to be confused with George Santos, as I sometimes do. George Soros, the Holocaust survivor and Democratic mega donor, is giving control of his $25 billion, yes, billion with a B, empire to his son, Alexander, who is 37 years old. He basically plans to continue his father's legacy. He plans to continue supporting voting rights and abortion rights, but he has also said that he's more political than his 92-year-old father. It'll be interesting to see whether or not the anti-Semitic attacks on the Soros family and the Soros Family Foundation continue. As we've discussed on this show, George Soros is the frequent target of both good faith criticism, but also bad faith anti Semitic attacks by those who disagree with how he spends his money and his liberal positions. Do you think that like we'll see any decrease in these anti Semitic targetings, Benjamin, as it kind of shifts hands?
Sadly, no. I mean, I was hopeful that when, George Soros, he said, is, in his 90s, I was hopeful that when he passed away, that the far right would lose this boogeyman that they've always, attacked. Especially, he's a Holocaust survivor too. It's always, made it seem even worse. But now the fact that he's passing it to his son, and his 37-year-old son, who also has the last name Soros, I think sadly we are going to see anti-Soros rhetoric, anti-Semitic anti-Soros rhetoric continue for decades to come, unfortunately.
Yeah. We'll certainly be watching it closely. In the anti-Semitic or not beat, there was a small story that I've been watching this week that I'm not sure has been resolved, but a flight to Tel Aviv from Italy caused conversation on Twitter this week, mostly among pro-Israel folks. It was a Ryanair flight during which a flight attendant allegedly said that the flight was about to land in Palestine, which, fact check, Tel Aviv is obviously in Israel. There is currently a Palestinian Authority, but no real country of Palestine that exists as a recognized body. Ryanair told me this morning via email that it was all an innocent mistake with no intent and was, quote, immediately corrected and apologized for by the senior crew member. As Rabbi Uri Pilichowski said on Twitter, who cares? But I did think that it was interesting that it caused such a fervor online, this idea of an announcement being, such an attack on one's identity.
But was it a mistake?
Yeah, I mean, the EU is not exactly known for its affinity toward Israel, and Ireland is not exactly known as a super pro-Israel place. Although Bougie Herzog, in Israeli politicians' father, has deep ties to Ireland that are very interesting. But I don't know. Well, I'm kind of skeptical of their response. They did a good job sending the PR email, but maybe they should encourage folks to take political stances once
Somewhere
they've
else.
reached the ground. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want your flight attendants or your pilots taking political stances. I don't think.
Yeah, pilots, that could get dangerous very quickly.
Yeah.
Stick to the flight path. And just one more funny news thing before we bring Elad on. Ed Sheeran had some overlap with Jewish news this week, right, Benjamin?
Yeah, apologize if you hear some dogs barking in the background. Ed Sheeran, you never want to go after Taylor Swift fans, but I don't know how rabid Ed Sheeran's fans are. But Ed Sheeran had a concert Sunday night at New Jersey's MetLife Stadium. It had 89,000 people in attendance. And I don't know if the stadium or his fans put out, or as a news site put out an article saying it broke the all-time attendance record at MetLife Stadium. But turns out that is actually not true. It turns out the attendance record at MetLife Stadium was in 2012 at a Jewish event called the Siyum Hashas, where 93,000 Jews gathered to celebrate the completion of a 7.5-year cycle of studying a page of Talmud a day, which is known as the Daf Yomi. That happens every 7.5 years. And they had their big event there in 2012, and they had, I can do my math correctly, 4,000 more people than the Ed Sheeran concert.
I think you got it. Yeah. So don't mess with the Jews. We're known to count, I suppose.
Yeah.
And engaging in anti-Semitic stereotypes like Jews being good at math is a good transition to our next topic.
Today's guest, we want to bring him on. Elad Nehorai is a columnist whose writing can be found in the Daily Beast, the Huffington Post, the Guardian, and of course here at the Forward. His latest column for us is about Elon Musk, the CEO of Twitter, and asks if Elon Musk is America's most dangerous anti-Semite. We all know since Musk took over Twitter, he's reinstated the accounts of notorious anti-Semites, and he often likes and shares posts that have been deemed anti-Semitic. And, he's not that he taps into existing prejudices and fears, but he's giving his 140 million followers a convenient scapegoat for complex societal problems. Elad wrote in his article, quote, "No other person has ever had this much power over media and to spread a message." Elad, lots to talk about. Welcome to the podcast. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Hi.
Now we
got
It's a good thing I write about tech. But
how are you? Welcome to the show.
Me.
Yeah,
appreciate it. I'm glad to be here.
So Elad, you've been tracking anti-Semitism for a long time. I know because I've been working with you for a long time, and you've tracked it on Twitter specifically for a long time as well. What inspired this particular piece, and how and when did you start looking at Elon Musk's online behavior specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was always, I was actually, was like a year and a half ago, I was working on a piece about extremism, online extremism. And I was really fascinated. I'm a marketer also, in addition to the writing. And I think I'm really fascinated by the way these like kind of extreme messages get spread. And I remember interviewing actually Sarah Hightowers for another article, the person that I quoted in my article. And I remember kind of saying offhandedly, I was like, you notice, like, I feel like there's a lot of these kind of like cultish followers, for lack of a better word, cultish followers of Elon Musk. And I think that started to interest me because I'm always fascinated by the kind of dynamic, charismatic leader role that people will latch onto and the way they'll kind of give up, seemingly willingly give up their autonomy for. And I think that was the first thing I kind of noticed, actually, before any overt bigotry or anything like that. It was more the attachment a lot of his followers had, and that he seemed to kind of encourage in ways that I had noticed with other toxic leaders. And so the more I investigated, the more I looked at that, and the more that the purchase of Twitter started to come into play, the more I started to kind of notice that he was diving more into conspiratorial thinking, more overt transphobia, I think was like the biggest indicator at first. And I think once I noticed the conspiratorial thinking, it became relatively easy to see that eventually this could lead towards anti-Semitism. And so I kind of kept my eye on it. And it just started to be, because I'm particularly tuned into and interested in coded anti-Semitism, which I think in America today is far more mainstream than people give it credit for, because it's harder to deconstruct. It's often evolving because of the evolving nature of online discourse, especially if you're a guy like Elon Musk, who's like very online, as they say. The language is, if you're an observer, is by definition and actually is meant to be hard to follow, and allows for like people to doubt it. So the more I followed that, the more it became clear to me, and the more I kind of got concerned it was going to become more overt as time passed, which is what happened. And I'll add.
Do you really feel? I mean, it's hard to tell. A lot of the anti-Semitic stuff that he panders in, it's kind of with a wink and a nod. I mean,
Right.
do you feel? And Elon Musk is also known as such a prankster. You know, sending poop emojis to reporters, and is this just him being a tech bro and having fun with the establishment, or does he think he actually has anti-Semitic sentiments?
I think it's kind of a false dichotomy to say that it is either one or the other. I think that a lot of the times, I think as someone who has so much power, has so much influence, I think one thing that is impossible to deny is that his antics or his conspiratorial thinking benefit him. It benefits him to distract, when he's talking about like a massive conspiracy against him or against the right and these kinds of things. What that does is it takes the eye away from his own responsibility, and it focuses people's energy on like this very evil, puppet master behind the scenes, which is something that rich and powerful people have been doing for ages, is to essentially use Jews as a kind of distraction or scapegoat to focus ideas, energy, and activism away from the places it needs to go. So a lot of people on the right are feeling genuinely like there's something wrong with the world. It needs to be fixed. There needs to be a change happening. And what Elon Musk is doing is distracting them, focusing them on this like invisible enemy, which the right has been doing for ages and which he is doing in kind of like a much higher level. And I think that is the part we need to focus on more, is like the ways in which the myth is being used and the way in which it endangers Jews. So like, do I think that he's just a prankster? Do I think that he's like a rabid internal anti-Semite? I'm not sure. I'm not actually that concerned with it. What I'm more concerned with is the effect of it anti-Semitic? Is the result of it going to put Jews in danger? And I think at the end of the day, the thing that's impossible to deny is that he's caught up in conspiratorial thinking and sharing it and empowering the people who are violent or encouraging violence to have more of a voice on his platform. Those things combined make him anti-Semitic in effect, and that's much more important than whether he's anti-Semitic, in his mind. Because I think the thing is, someone could even not be anti-Semitic but be aware that being anti-Semitic or codedly anti-Semitic or conspiratorial helps him. And I think there's no doubt that he's aware of that.
So a lot of groups that track both anti-Semitism and other forms of hate speech, the Network Contagion Research Institute comes to mind, have found that often these tropes don't just spread within the communities that are the immediate targets of them, like Elon's 40 million followers. I mean, that's a pretty big subgroup, but have also
140
found,
million.
yeah, 140 million,
Yeah.
have also found that they spread to other communities almost like a virus. I know after Kanye West's anti-Semitic comments, you saw not only in like more Black affinity groups, but also in right-wing groups and far left groups, like these tropes kind of popping up. Have you so far seen a similar effect happening? And does the fact that these messages are coded like allow them to spread in those ways a bit easier?
Oh yeah, I mean, it was actually interesting because my article, was relatively popular on Twitter. I got a lot of different reactions. It was kind of a fun way to test that theory that you're talking about. And I was actually surprised. I think I was kind of expecting and it was true that almost the vast majority of the people that were going after it were, either very passionate Elon Musk fans or rabid anti-Semites on the right. But there were definitely kind of different, splinter groups or different groups that people that don't necessarily think about that were getting upset about. For example, there's kind of this subset of anti-Israel accounts that are extremely caught up in the conspiratorial thinking around Israel. And so for them, I was actually surprised just because they tend to associate with the left, but this group seemed to be kind of similarly obsessed with praising Elon Musk, this particular subset of anti-Israel accounts. And I found that to be really, really interesting. And I think it was kind of like one of those things that happens very often in these communities that become kind of splinters of their own community, where the focus is so much on the enemy that it's very easy to suddenly ally with people that are so like not really on your side at all, but because they hate the same people you hate, you kind of join them. Another group, is that this was relatively small, but there was definitely a group of people who were, Black supporters of Kanye, or at least accounts purporting to be Black, which is actually hard to tell these days, and that were spreading that message. And I think that's not surprising at all, because I wrote an article in my Substack like maybe 6 months ago about how people on 4chan were pretending to be Black people on Twitter, specifically to take advantage of Elon Musk's takeover and to spread hate speech further and to further amplify Kanye's messaging and to further divide the Jewish and the Black community. They felt like this is a really opportune moment to split these communities. And so I think what you end up seeing on Twitter is not just the fact that it spreads like a virus, but that there are people that are consciously aware that this is what happens, and they use that to divide communities. And so I think that those two kind of like, there's the organic things that are happening, and then there's the thing that we're unaware of. Very, very often people are unaware of that there's actually a concerted, purposeful effort happening behind the scenes as well.
Right. The three of us are very active on Twitter, but I'm wondering, what would you say to, most people in America? I mean, Twitter is one of the smallest social networks when you look at Instagram or Facebook or, WhatsApp. We think, we are on Twitter all the time, for better or for worse, as journalists, but most of the country is not. And what would you say to someone who'd be like, well, who cares? This is happening in some corner that most of the world's not even paying attention to.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's truth to the fact that we can't let one social network overwhelm our thinking or take over our minds. But I think the hard numbers around Elon Musk's takeover really, I would actually argue, are underestimated, especially by journalists, and especially like people who tend to see legacy media as very powerful and popular. So like, for example, the 140 million fans that Elon Musk has, or I don't know, followers that Elon Musk has alone is a massive number. That's massive. Like, I think I brought up in the article is something like Tucker Carlson had 3.5 million viewers an episode. on average. And what's interesting is, like, I was looking at some of his, anti-Semitically coded tweets, and those were going to like 5 million people, or were viewed by 5 million people. And I'm sure his more viral ones were viewed by even more people. So if you think about the amount of followers, the amount of people are seeing all of his tweets, the amount of people are discussing all his tweets, at the end of the day, Twitter is number one popular. When you have that amount of followers, no matter what every tweet you do is viral and is incredibly influential, has a lot of power. I think that's one thing. I think the second thing is that this is the first time that an overtly bigoted CEO has taken over a social media network. And I think this aspect of it is even more important than his follower count, because what that means is that then you have these influential people like Andrew Anglin, who started Daily Stormer, who by all accounts should not have a social media account anywhere, and largely has been relegated to kind of like the quote unquote like the corners of the internet, dark shadows of the internet, like his own website, 4chan, like these places that are almost like kind of segregated from the rest of popular social media. Now all of a sudden you have a social media platform. I agree that it's smaller than, let's say, Facebook, but on the other hand, it's the most mainstream of the platforms that allows this kind of speech now, and is now allowing quote unquote regular people using Twitter to have access to these violent anti-Semites and violent bigots who are very, very over. It's no longer something that they have to code themselves on Twitter. Now they can say these things openly.
Right.
So all these dynamics work together in a way that create a network effect that I would argue is actually much more powerful, much more popular than a lot of the media that we tend to associate with as being powerful.
So what's the answer here? I mean, do we leave Twitter? Do we call the ADL, as half of my emails say a day? The ADL has, in all seriousness, been asking Twitter to take hate speech on their platform seriously for a significant amount of time, and now the person in charge is, the wolf is running the hen house. What are we to do after we draw attention to this?
Oh man, I was hoping you wouldn't ask me that question, because
It's a hard one.
That's a hard one, and of course one that writers are not equipped for. But I think I think there's a number of answers to that. I think one thing is that we just have to be aware that, as you described, the dynamic has changed now. It's no longer going to work and I feel like this is a failed effort that's happening right now to try to influence Elon Musk. Like, we're not in that world where, in the same way that there's a lot of lobbying efforts to change Facebook's approach to anti-Semitism, to bigotry, and to hate speech, Twitter is kind of like going out of its way to make sure that they promote bigots and that kind of thing. So I think there needs to be, number one, a more concerted awareness campaign that doesn't just exist on Twitter. It was nice that the article, that people were talking about this on Twitter. But the thing is, this is a discussion that, I think what you said, Benjamin, was really true, that Twitter very often exists in its own little bubble. It does go outwards, but we need to talk about this in a way that is bigger, and is taken seriously. And that, rather than trying to influence Twitter, what we really need to be doing is working to influence, for example, GM just did a partnership with Tesla, and just did and the CEO of Twitter just did the CEO of GM just did this big awareness campaign with Elon Musk. It was 2 days after my article came out. And I just found that really fascinating, because I think in the past, let's say, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if a CEO had just gotten a massive amount of attention for bigoted comments, I don't think there would be as much excitement to work with them. I think that we're kind of in this other age now where, it's very hard to get past the noise. It's very easy for people to cancel discussions about bigotry by talking about cancellation, if that makes sense. And it's very easy to get very murky in our discussion. I think what we really need to do is break out into a way where other companies and other people take this seriously, to the point where it's no longer acceptable, in my opinion, it shouldn't be acceptable to work with someone like Elon Musk, no matter how powerful he is, how much money he has. It should not be this thing where just because he's rich and powerful, people want to work with him. It should be toxic enough to work with him that these companies are not invested in doing so, because ultimately what we've seen with Elon Musk and the way that he's risen has largely been because he's a hype machine. He's really good. I think he's actually, people tend to talk down about him, but I think he's incredibly smart at building hype about himself and his companies. And so much of what his success has been around that hype. And there really needs to be a serious accounting of how, how much we're going to accept the legitimization of a person like that in the public sphere. So I think that is maybe like the best way that we can get started. And of course, continuing to organize and connect with each other and work together with other marginalized groups is always the standard answer I'll give with that stuff. Because at the end of the day, I'm talking about anti-Semitism, but Elon Musk is going after lots of people, in particular trans people. And the more that we can kind of ally with them, the better. Yeah.
Well, Elad, I put a link to your column about Elon Musk in the comments, so people can read that. We'll put it in the show notes as well for the podcast. Where can people find you? I know, obviously, you write for The Forward. If people want to follow you, I know you're big on Twitter. Is that weird that we're sending people to your Twitter page?
It is what it is. I can follow me on Blue Sky now too, I guess. I'm Elad N over there. And then you can follow me on Substack, eladnehorai.substack.com. And I'll be ranting on Twitter probably until the ship crashes. So I'll be there. And
all right.
Thank you so
thanks
much.
so much.
This
really has been a great conversation. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, I mean, part of the difficulty is a lot of people that are pointing out this is happening have built significant followings on this platform. I mean, I have a significant following on this platform. Elad has a significant following, The Forward, and you, the ADL, everyone engages in this public square that is involved in opinion setting for these conversations. So it is really, it feels like a hostile takeover of this space. But
I was about, when I posted Elad's story to my Twitter, I was going to tag Elon Musk in the tweet. And then I decided not to, because I was like, I don't want to invite any trouble and get banned from Twitter. So I decided not to tag Elon Musk in that.
Yeah, to butcher the Animal Farm saying all engagement is equal, some engagement is more equal than others. So let's try not to go for the the anti-Semites. But
so we'll link to all of Elad's social media and his column at The Forward. Before we wrap up, let's do some recommendations for the week. Laura, what would you like to recommend to our listeners this week?
Yeah, so first of all, I've heard a lot of you like that we do something that's totally not Jewish a lot of the time for our recommendations. Let us know if you would rather us recommend Jewy specific things. I'm happy to find Jewier things to talk about, a sentence I never thought I would need to say. But please let us know what you like and what you don't like about this show. It's for you. But that being said, after eating my words about the air quality, I swiftly ordered an air filter. I will be perfectly honest that I ordered the cheapest one that was available on Amazon. But so far, so good. It's chugging away in my little studio apartment. It's a Levoit air filter, and the smoke is gone. But I do think that it's also allergy season, and I've been noticing a difference. So highly recommend that. Wildfire season is only starting, as our West Coast brethren can attest to. It's nice to have an air filter. So that is my news you can use recommendation for the week. What about you, Benjamin, our erudite recommender?
Well, I will say mine is Jewish, but breaking from tradition, it is not about binge watching something I saw on TV. Maybe next week I'll do that. But this week, I am recommending a book. It's an old book. It's from, I think, the early 90s, 1991. It's called The Search for God at Harvard by Ari Goldman. And for those of you who don't know, Ari Goldman's a longtime religion reporter at the New York Times. That's where he got his start, and now he's a esteemed journalism professor at Columbia University. And we had him speak to our staff a few weeks ago, and he had mentioned this book, and I picked it up, and I'm almost done with it, so I can't tell you the ending. But I've been really enjoying it so far. It's a short read, it's an easy read, quick read. So I recommend that. The Search for God at Harvard.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Binyamin. This has been very interesting conversation today. And also, folks, you can let us know if there are other people you'd like to hear from in future episodes, and we'll do our best to bring them to you. But other than that, Binyamin, I'll see you around the digital office, and we'll talk to everyone next week.
All right. Take care.